It is time for Daniel and the Deacons, and good morning to you, Deacon Daniel Brahier. Always enjoy having you on the air with us each and every Wednesday, particularly during this Lenten season. Deacon Dan, a lot of people entering into this Lenten season a weekend. We want to talk a little bit about fasting and some of the things that we're giving up. So now that we've made a few steps into this sacred season.
Well, we have. Good morning to both of you. It's amazing that we're already a week down the road from Ash Wednesday.
Yeah.
You know, I was just having a conversation with a couple of students at the university last night about how Lent is this paradox where on one hand it feels like it takes forever, and on the other hand you blink your eyes and it's Holy Week. You know,
right.
So it's really interesting how that works. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that happens at the beginning of Lent and on Ash Wednesday is most people try to set some kind of goals for themselves, you know, for things to work on during Lent. And it kind of feels, in a sense, like a New Year's resolution. But we know what happens with New Year's resolutions. Most people abandon ship within the first couple of weeks. And unfortunately, a similar thing happens in Lent. We go into it with all of the best intentions of things we're planning on doing and picking up on our prayer life and so forth. And sometimes it just doesn't happen right out of the gate. And you got to kind of step back and say, okay, let me redefine what I'm going to do during this season. And luckily, Lent is long enough that we can recalibrate throughout the season. And so Jesus in the gospel on Ash Wednesday talks about the three pillars of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving. Well, kind of. Actually, what he does, he talks about almsgiving and then prayer and then fasting. And I find that kind of interesting because he orders them different than we often hear it when people refer to those three practices. And what I'm going to argue is that fasting should maybe be the first one, that we think about fasting and then prayer and almsgiving, because fasting is really the heart of the season. It's the one that is the center of all of the Lenten practices, and the others are probably not even possible without doing that first. So let me explain that. When I was a kid, and you guys remember this, right? We always gave up candy, we give up desserts, we give up chocolate, and by the time we got to the 8th grade, they were telling us, don't worry about giving up anything. You know, instead, just do something good for someone else. Did you guys have that experience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, the tone really shifted from one of doing penance and giving up to just doing something good for someone. And, you know, doing good for someone is important. But I never quite figured out at that time, are they trying to water down Lent, or are they trying to get us to focus on things other than fasting? And it may have been a combination of both, but fasting in its strictest sense means to say no to some worldly pleasure. And so, you know, why do we fast? There's lots of reasons, but for one thing, we're joining ourselves to the suffering of Christ in his passion. Now, Jesus Christ died and suffered for us, and so it's our way to sort of join in that suffering. And when there's lots of ways that we can fast. So, yeah, we can give up sweets and meat or snack and desserts, soda, alcohol, coffee. But the bigger question is, why are we doing that in the first place? And I think that my sort of elementary school mind was you just give up things for Lent because you're giving them up, you know. But St. Benedict said, the reason why we deny ourselves of things is so that we can give those things to somebody else. So when we give things that we deny ourselves to somebody else, that naturally leads to that idea of almsgiving. So Jesus talks in the gospel last week about giving alms, and another translation of the Greek is not giving alms, but is doing acts of charity. So in the early church, you know, we were aware that fish was a lot cheaper than meat. You know, and I get asked this question a lot, especially on our university campus. Why do Catholics give up meat? Well, there's lots of reasons, but because part of it is just simply sacrifice. But the other is, historically, fish was so much cheaper than meat around the Mediterranean Sea that it was a luxury to eat meat. So if you gave up meat during all or part of Lent, you saved a lot of money. And you didn't save the extra money to stick it in your pocket. You saved the money to give it to the poor. You know, so I tell our students, if you give up 3 Starbucks a week for all of Lent, by the time you get to Easter, you got $100 in your pocket. Give that to charity. So the idea is that the fasting leads to the almsgiving. The two go hand in hand, but the fasting has to come first. And the same thing is true about fasting from stuff we do. We think about things that consume our time, like television or doom scrolling on our phone or binging TV shows. None of those are inherently wrong or evil, but what they do is that they use our time in a way that might be other than God would like for us to be spending our time. So if you fast from something that consumes your time, guess what? You got extra time on your hands, and what can you do with it? You can give that time to prayer. And so now prayer becomes a result of the fasting. If I don't spend my time doing this thing on my phone, then I will have extra time, because heaven knows we often hear people say, I would like to pray more, I just don't have time, I'm too busy. Mm-hmm. What are we spending our time doing? Can we reallocate it, fast from the things that give us the pleasure, and instead give it to God, which in the end will give us even greater pleasure, though it's hidden at first. I found it fascinating. You may have heard back on February 13th, Pope Leo released his Lenten message. Mm-hmm. And in his Lenten message, I want to read this to you because I think this was just really good. He was giving recommendations for what to fast from during Lent. And he said, refrain from words that offend and hurt our neighbor. Let us begin by disarming our language, avoiding harsh words and rash judgment, refraining from slander and speaking ill of those who are not present and cannot defend themselves. Instead, let's strive to measure our words and cultivate kindness and respect in our families, among our friends, at work, on social media, in political debates, in the media, and in Christian communities. In this way, words of hatred will give way to words of hope and peace. Beautifully said. Yeah. The idea is by fasting from the harsh and offensive words, we can then give alms. We can then give to other people things that are positive, those words of hope and peace. So when we're, I think particularly we think about those people that are not around to defend themselves. So we reverse our course. We fast from one thing to do something else. So fasting is a lot bigger than just giving up chocolate. Yeah. Mm. So what we give up becomes the center of the Lenten journey. One final point on that. I mentioned Saint Benedict earlier. Mm-hmm. Saint Benedict said, and I love this, he said that when we fast from something, don't think of it as restraining ourselves from doing something. Think of it as retraining ourselves to do something different. So it's not just a restraint, it's a retrain. Like Lent is a gymnasium, and so we are retraining ourselves to act, to think, to behave in different ways. And, that's why we call them Lenten practices. We are practicing what God wants us to be like. And in order to do that, the first thing we have to do is to let go of something that we're already doing. That's the fasting. And so Jesus said the two most important commandments are to love God and love neighbor. So in the end, that fasting is taking us outside of ourselves so we can focus on God and neighbor.
I love that part of retraining ourselves, Deacon Dan, right? Because it's great to take this time of 40 days and give up something. If your intention is to pick it up right as Easter begins, it's nice that you've made that sacrifice. But to your point, there's no retraining in that. I mean, you pick that thing back up. But if you refrain from harsh words, if you've changed some of those negative habits, if you put away some of the technology, create more time for God, and you create a new habit within that time frame that continues on, that's a better thing, right?
Yeah, I think it becomes a both and. I think there are some things that we can abstain from Lent during Lent that we can pick up on Easter, and it's okay. So an example might be somebody might give up drinking coffee during Lent, and then on Easter help themselves to a cup of coffee on Easter morning. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Right. But if that's the only thing that we're doing is giving up the physical pleasure that we just start doing again on Easter, then we did not retrain ourselves, And so Father Ed Hayes, in one of his books, one time said that, when you get to the top of the mountain at the end of Lent, the idea is to stay at the top of the mountain. Don't just stick a flag on the mountain and go back down to where you started. Stay at the mountain because you've actually developed new habits.
I love that. I love that. My final question, why do they call it a fast when it seems to go so slow?
That's good. That's true.
One of the ultimate paradoxes of Lent, isn't it? Because anytime we give something up, it just seems like forever until you're able to do it again.
Love it.
Deacon Dan Brahier, Daniel in the Deacon's Den. We love our Wednesdays, and that's the primary reason. Have a blessed day.
Thanks, Deacon Dan.
Thank you. You too.